physical education or physical activity on stress management, I can broaden it to more stress management, or just like still or if I find something on just physical activity that doesn't deal with stress management, is that okay? Or like, what are my parameters?
I think it would be better to broaden one of your elements first instead of broadening both at the same time.
Okay.
So are you looking for a specific stress management technique? And
yeah.
Which
physical
one?
Activity.
Okay. And you're not finding any of that for the population?
Right now, I'm not finding, when I find it for autism, it doesn't include stress management. It just includes physical activity.
But what is the outcome that they're trying to address in these articles related to physical activity?
Just exercise related.
So just be physically active. And they're saying that there are no benefits other than being physically active is good.
So far, when I read those like abstract, like I haven't gotten to read like in depth yet because I have a stats exam too. But when I'm reading them, like so far, like the titles don't include it, or like when I'm searching it, it doesn't include the word stress like at all. Like when I search it, like stress management, stress and all, just physical activity and exercise with autism.
Okay. So maybe you can broaden it out just a little bit by not necessarily looking at the outcome of physical activity on stress, but you can broaden it just a bit to look at more like the impacts of physical activity for kids with autism.
Okay.
Not specific to stress.
Okay.
But you can look into other domains of life. So what are the benefits of physical activity on the physical domain? You know, fitness levels increase, weight loss, strength, flexibility, whatever. On the social domains, on the emotional domains, cognitive domain. And so physical activity is likely to have benefits in all of those areas for anybody, including kids with autism. And so if you are not finding anything specific to the outcome of stress, then take that piece out of it and just look at the benefits of physical activity for kids with autism.
Okay, because I have found that piece.
Okay, go there. Do all that.
Okay.
Hashtag all the articles.
But I still can do stress if I can include like one or two articles if I do find stress.
Yes. So this is where maybe you can broaden that element of your search to not be specific to kids with autism and just see what the literature says about the impacts of physical activity on stress in general for anybody. And so this is where you would say there is a lack of literature that looks at the impacts of physical activity for stress management for an autism population. Therefore, research needs to be done here.
Okay. Thank you.
So if you're literally finding nothing, then there is a gap in the knowledge base. That is like a clear indicator of this is where research needs to happen. But it's frustrating. So, but that's where we just have to like make every effort to find, use different search terms, do whatever we need to do to find all of that.
Okay. Thank you so much. That really helped.
You're welcome. Any other questions about evidence table searching type stuff?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So on Friday, Marika wanted me to come meet with her to talk about my thesis. So in that meeting, if my research question changes, could I change my question for this class too?
As long as it's not to something totally different, you can tweak.
Okay, it's still going to be about yoga, but it's not, I don't know about the population. She said that we would talk about it more on Friday.
Okay. Yes, but as soon as you decide what that is, just shoot me an email so that I can be aware of what the changes are and not be blindsided by a new topic or something.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, any other questions? All right, if you do, you're welcome to email me and we can have a little email conversation about it. Okay. So our readings this week, one of them was on outcome measurements for performance improvement and such. And then the other one was on the ICF. And we are mostly going to spend today talking about the ICF and outcome measurement in general, but then specifically how you do it through the ICF. I have a number of PowerPoints that we're going to use to do this that I got from the Rehab Institute of Chicago, RIC, and an interdisciplinary group of doctors, PT, OT, RT, kind of everybody who works in the rehab world came together to create these modules about using the ICF for outcome measurement. And it was intended to be an interdisciplinary group doing this. And there were one of the rec therapists, actually, Heather, you know her, Jen Pyatt, contributed the rec therapy perspective to this. So they created these PowerPoints and they make them available for really anybody to use, but for faculty to use to teach this in our classes. There are like 5 or 6 PowerPoints, and the first time I taught this, I did all 5 or 6 PowerPoints, and it was hideous. Mostly because the later PowerPoints kind of reiterate what we learned in the beginning. The second time I taught this, I trimmed it way back down to 1 PowerPoint, and nobody got a good enough discussion or understanding of it. So now I'm in this like middle ground area where I think I'm only going to use 2 PowerPoints, at most 3. And so we'll spend today and I believe next week also, 2 weeks talking about outcome measurement. But for some people, the ICF is really easy to grasp, and other people, no matter how many times they read it, no matter how many times they see the little visual model, they never get it. So I'm hoping that you guys can just be straight up with me and say, I've got it or I don't got it. Because I don't want to kick a dead horse if you all have it, but I also don't want to skip on by things if you don't have it. So please tell me, like, I'm totally lost or not. And I will use that to gauge how many PowerPoints we need to use. I don't want this to be like death by PowerPoint for the next 2 weeks. So it's okay. All right? Just tell me if we're getting it or not. So on that note, let us start with module number 1. And we'll look at some websites and such. Did you guys hear that? Little chime from my, we'll turn that off. Sorry about that. Gonna share some screenage going on here. Can you guys see that PowerPoint okay? Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, hang on one second, because now I cannot see my notes. So I want to figure out some other way that I can see my notes. Yeah, now I can see my notes. Maybe. Nope. All right. We might have to hop in and out of this so that I can see my notes. Anyways, let's talk about very broadly. And again, these are slides that were not created by me, and some of the slides I don't like, and so I'm just going to skip right on over them. Like all of these. They also told us that we're not allowed to modify the slides, or I would delete all this stuff and not do the skipping, but that's, not going to happen. So let's just start a discussion here. What is an outcome? Guys, I will also post these PowerPoints for you after class. Don't all speak at once.
It's like the result of something, like what happens after the fact.
Okay, a result. Good. Any other thoughts?
It's what, this sounds silly, it's what you measure based on the intervention.
Okay, so when we're talking specifically in practice or interventions or whatever, it's what you measure?
Yeah.
Good. Any other?
I always associate outcome measures with goals. I start thinking of goals and objectives and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's not always exactly the goals that you're setting, but like somebody else said, it's a result of what your intervention is. So it's kind of a goal if you're setting certain goals for your intervention programs or your organization.
Sure. So you're thinking about kind of pre-intervention.
It's quantifiable.
Quantifiable. So it's related to our goals. It's quantifiable. It's a result. Something we measure. I think I got all of a synopsis of what you guys just said. So here's the definition. And there are a billion definitions of what an outcome is, but this is what they chose to use. A measurable individual, family, or community state, behavior, or perception that is measured along a continuum and is responsive to clinical interventions. Should we break that down, or is that pretty straightforward? I mean, outcomes can be on so many different levels. Like it says, individual, family, or community. And there are zillions of different outcomes, behaviors, states, perceptions, whatever. I think the key point here is that it's responsive to clinical interventions, right? Because we want to see change in our patients. Yes? Yes. Yes. And so if there's no response, if there's no response, that's a finding as well. But we would hope that our interventions are influencing some type of response or are resulting in some type of response and change in something. Oh. All right. What is an outcome measure?
The effectiveness of whatever you're doing, the intervention or whatever.
Close, but not quite. Good effort.
Is it kind of like the factors of the outcome and that you're kind of testing the differences around? I don't know.
Close, but not quite. Good effort.
Are you talking about like the FIM, like the scales and stuff that you use
Yes.
to actually measure your outcome?
Yes, I know. Using the term to define the term, right? So an outcome measure is the actual tool that you're using to measure whatever that outcome is, right? So a set of items that are used to create scores that are intended to quantify a patient's performance or health status based on standardization, evaluation protocols, or closed-ended questions. So anything that's in the big red book, regardless of the quality of it, I guess could technically be considered an outcome measure. Yeah, the big red book right there. Way to go, Holly. I'm at home where I would hold mine up. Okay, so I don't think the FIM is in there, but there are a variety of instruments in there that can be used to measure whatever outcomes, whether it's community reintegration or leisure satisfaction or trying to think of some of the other things, physical functioning, social functioning. What other, off the top of my head, I'm just trying to think of what's in there. There are so many in there, right? So
they do have the FIM in there.
Oh, they do? Hey, look at that. Wait, yeah. Got it too. So if the goal of as Holly said, tying it to goals, if the goal of your intervention is to increase somebody's quality of life, if you've got some type of scale that measures quality of life, that would be an outcome measure. Now, there's all sorts of things out there that people are using to measure these outcomes of their programs, and some are good and some are bad and some are real ugly, right? The good, the bad, and the ugly of research and measurement in our profession. The key is that everything that we use is standardized and validated, most of which, what in the big red book, it does fall into that category. So, if somebody is using my sarcastic Bob's depression inventory to measure the impacts of an intervention on depression, that is not a validated and standard scale. I would not consider that an outcome measure, no matter how much they call it an outcome measure. Okay, so why measure these characteristics of our patients using standardized outcome instruments? Why is this important to do? One of our articles kind of talked about it, but that's only one perspective of why.
When you have measurable outcomes, therefore you can justify the need. So for example, like
in rec therapy, if you have 300 veterans, but only 15% of those veterans are actually active in that program, then maybe that you need to reevaluate that program, and funding can go other places. Like, that's how the bigwigs are going to look at it, whether or not you
Sure.
get funding or if you don't get funding.
And, an extension of that, not just only 15% are active, but what if out of your 300 veterans, only 20% show change in their PTSD scores, if that's what you're trying to target? So if you measure that and it shows that only 20%, and you're saying, look at all this good that we're doing, our intervention is working, I would not say that 20% having change is working well, right? If we don't measure any of that, we would never know. So in terms of trying to justify our services, trying to ask for money, trying to, there's like 10,000 different things, right? So what are some other of those 10,000 different things?
It's also helpful with comparing to other studies that are done not at your facility.
Okay, so similar interventions or similar populations, and being able to see if you're having similar results. So if you are working with veterans in a VA and using a certain activity, and you see a community-based organization using that same activity and they publish something, wouldn't it be interesting to compare and see if you're getting the same results?
Right.
And if not, why? And are yours worse or better? Leads to other questions, right? So we can understand more about our interventions. So if things are worse, then what is it about the VA version of this treatment modality that is producing worse outcomes than the community-based version of that modality? Good.
I feel like that kind of leads into also the WHO article with universalization of and standardized tools so you can throughout the world compare.
Absolutely.
Population.
So, there are, I don't even know how many measures of depression, right? And there are some that are standardized and validated, right? So what does that mean? Standardized and validated.
They have empirical evidence or scientific evidence backing up their theory or.
Absolutely. So it's not like one day I wake up and decide I want to measure depression, so I just throw together a bunch of questions, and then tomorrow I wake up and decide I want to measure it again and I throw together a bunch of different questions. That's not a good measure. So standardized means it's been developed, tested, refined, again and again, until it's something that everybody feels is like a solid measure of whatever you're using. And then it becomes widely used. So like Beck's depression inventory, that's my non-sarcastic version of the depression measure, right? Or the PHQ-9, the Patient Health Questionnaire. Those are standardized and validated. So they all have their benefits. So why is one 9 items long and another is 20 items long? There's lots of different reasons for why instruments that are measuring the same thing are different lengths, and they ask different questions, and that's a whole science unto itself in terms of instrument development. But I can't remember where I was going with that. There are lots of options out there, so you have to be critical in choosing outcome measures. Okay, so you guys said some of these things, I think. So obviously, we need to measure outcomes for our documentation purposes, right? For use in clinical information systems, for the development of clinical knowledge and professional education. So if we can get things published and information out there about the outcomes of our interventions measured in a systematic, standardized way. And then, like Shannon said, resource allocation and accountability, right? I always go back to this. This is like the biggest reason in my mind why we have to measure outcomes is that if you say that your program does this and you have no evidence to support that, then you can't say that. You cannot ask people to come bring your people to my program, receive my services. I'm pretty sure they work. Because people have said to me they feel better after my program. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but that is not the type of evidence that we want when we have to justify ourselves to for reimbursement, when we have to ask for money to function. Okay, so we need more quality evidence than I just feel better.
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't want to minimize that, patient perspectives on their functioning is always important. Okay, so some other thoughts about what outcome measures can help us do: establishing a patient's baseline status, tracking patients' progress over time. If you give that information back to your patients, it's informing them of their progress in some quantifiable manner instead of, you're doing great, you look great today, you look better than last week, which is good info, but is not in any quantifiable manner. Also informing payers of patient progress and providing data collected over time to improve care. So tying into that McCormick article about quality improvement. Okay, I gotta move all you little faces over because it's blocking my text. There it goes. So some benefits of outcome measures. Did somebody just have a question and I cut you off? I apologize. Nope. Okay. There are various, down the left-hand side of this little chart here, various stakeholders who can benefit from having outcome measurement knowledge, or just the information we gain from doing outcome measurement. And then in the middle here, we have like these different levels at each one of these stakeholders. So looking at health professionals, on the individual level, outcome knowledge or outcome measurement helps us make better clinical decisions, which means we're more competent, right? So if I know that after so many years of this intervention with so many patients that it doesn't reduce PTSD as quickly with as good of long-term outcomes as this intervention, then I shouldn't choose intervention A, right? I should choose intervention B that has the better outcomes in a shorter amount of time. So already it's making me a better practitioner. I am providing better services for my client. On a group or an organization level, that just means accountability. We're being held accountable for what we choose with our patients. The stakeholders, again, over here, the colleagues or referral sources. On an individual level, it helps them communicate better. On a group and organization level, efficiency. A lot of these are kind of the same thing. Efficiency, effectiveness. I mean, those are different things. Be clear on that one. Patients as a stakeholder. So again, on an individual level, communication, if we can work with them and give them knowledge about their progress, they could be more engaged with their progress through their treatment, right? So how many people or how many times do you know patients who just kind of completely disconnect from the therapeutic process because they don't really know how they're progressing? Like they feel better, but they're not really sure. And am I ever going to get out of here type of a thing, or I'm just here forever. They don't feel like they have direct control over anything. And so when we're able to communicate with them about their progress and give them specific feedback about their progress based on these outcome measures, then I think they would be more engaged. That plays into effectiveness at the organization level, ensures payers, so our reimbursement, right? Which then shows the value of the services at the organization level. And then scientists like me, us, I'm going to say all of us, we're all scientists, right? So we can evaluate the benefits of certain interventions or clinical trials. We talked about this last week in terms of systematic reviews and being able to gather all of that knowledge and evaluate what works and what doesn't work. This tells us what plays into effectiveness. Can you guys think of any other stakeholders maybe who aren't listed here who could benefit from outcome measures or knowledge about outcomes? I can think of one that's not on here.
Families?
Yeah, that's exactly who I was thinking of. Right? So if you're paying bazillions of dollars, I don't know, to have your loved one in a treatment facility for whatever, and you get no knowledge about their progress other than doing good or not doing good. I think that would be hard. I mean, I've never been in that situation, so I don't know, but I assume that that would probably be a difficult thing. Like, how do you see any return on your investment, right? If that's how you want to look at it from purely a monetary standpoint, right? But unless you're uber rich, money is not, falling off the tree for you to just pay for endless treatment.
Well, and families are usually the one that the individual goes back to. So if they're informed about what we're doing, then, they can carry over that into their home life, because a lot of them do become the caregivers. So.
And in many situations, family members are the decision makers about their treatment and where they go. And so while there are patient confidentiality issues, to some degrees, families are allowed to be involved in that to some degree. So it just seems like they would be a natural part of the process of providing information and keeping, communicating and keeping people engaged. So yes, families. Any other stakeholders that are kind of missing from this list? I'm not saying there are other than families, but.
Would students be one?
Students?
Yeah, like in their learning process, I feel like 20 years ago in RT, like the things, the interventions you were learning about could or could not apply. Whereas, with more and more research, you can say, this is proven to work. These are our clinical guidelines. Absolutely. That's a really good idea. I mean, if we're talking about like the entirety of all interventions that could be taught to students in their RT education, why would we teach things that we're unsure about their outcome, right? If we had knowledge like definitive, this plus this will equal this in terms of treatment, and this is the outcome that we're trying to achieve with this population, then we should, at the bare minimum, be informing students of those effective treatment outcomes. Good. I like it. Maybe I'll have to write those people at RAC and be like, you're missing two groups on here, students and family. They might not appreciate that. Worth a shot.
Yeah. All right. So what are some facilitators of outcome measurement? So if we think about what makes it possible to do it from the perspective of individual practitioners, what would make, many of you are employed, what makes it possible for you to do outcome measurement?
Having a patient.
Okay, having clients, that's not on our list, but yes. Naturally, you have to have somebody to measure.
Yes.
Okay, so how about a positive attitude, right? So you have to be willing to measure change and understand that the benefits of measuring change, right? So how many people think, oh, just another thing on my list to do?
Right.
Yeah.
You think that, Jake? I can't see your face because I don't have, are you nodding your head? Where are you? There you are. You're eating. So yes, you think it's just one more thing on your list of things to do?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought that's what I...
No, I was just showing food.
Okay. Many people do feel that way. So, I mean, if you were going to own it, I was going to say, yeah, way to own it. If you don't see that there's any value in it, then that would not be a facilitator, right? You would think that it's just one more thing on your list of things. Okay, so flexibility. In terms of room for personal considerations, this is like taking client perspectives into account in terms of what the outcomes are that we're trying to achieve. So everything that we do should be individualized, right? We shouldn't be doing blanket treatments for populations. It should be based on client need and want. And so if we can be flexible, then that could help facilitate outcome measurement. Okay, practicality. So this really speaks more to the ability to use this knowledge to negotiate with, third party or private insurance payers like insurance and stuff. If we think there's value in it and we see the practical use in this knowledge, then we can use it to get reimbursed. The consistency of treatment element. This is talking about how if treatments are consistent within a certain population in your facility or with a certain population, then it's a little bit easier to measure outcomes. If it's all over the place and you want to try to measure one type of outcome, but there's no set protocol that we follow in terms of how that intervention is delivered, it's very difficult to measure an outcome because there's no consistency in how it's delivered, right? The intervention. So this is why treatment protocols or standards of care, we talked about that a few weeks ago, are really important, or best practices, are really important. This is how it should be done. And you can get really detailed with a treatment protocol, 1 + 2 + 3, step 1, 2, 3, blah, blah, blah. That all of that together produces this outcome. And if different rec therapists implement things differently, then it could be very difficult to measure. You could have results all over the place and not understand why. It could be because Claire does it differently than Holly, who does it differently from me, and there's no consistency, so we don't really know why the results are all over the place. So there are also some external facilitators, things that make outcome measurement possible. So access to resources about a range of measures, or access to the measures themselves. If we can't get these instruments, then we can't use them, obviously. The Big Red Book is awesome because it does provide us access to some degree. Now, you might flip open to something and be like, yes, I want to use this. And then it has that watermark across the page that says, do not copy. Yes. Don't do that. Don't copy it. We'll be breaking the law. Okay. So there are some measures that are not free that you have to purchase from a publishing company or directly from an author or whatever. And that's unfortunate, but it is kind of what it is. And this could play into this next element. So if you have an organization or a boss or whatever who thinks it's worthwhile to do outcome measurement, and you go to them and say, hey, I want to pay $30, and that will give us access to 500 surveys that we can use to measure quality of life, and they say, yes, awesome, do it, here's the $30. That support is vital. If they don't provide it, it makes it very difficult. Okay, so what about, so you know that you want to do this, you have support to do it, but if you're not sure how to do it, it could make it difficult. So if you have guidance, whether it's from somebody in your facility who knows how to select these things, or somebody in your profession, broader in your profession, like a professor or a former colleague or whoever, or a fellow doc student or something, or a master's student, that you can call on and say, hey, I want to measure this, but I'm not sure how I can find an instrument to do that. Can you help me? Understanding how to get those, where to get them, how to administer them, and how to interpret all of the results on the back end as a facilitator. I'm sure you guys can see where we're going next. What are the barriers to outcome measurement? Some of maybe the exact opposite of those ones we just listed.
Lack of resources.
Exactly. So on an individual level, so you as a practitioner, time. Okay, so I have to find these things. I have to administer it. I have to score it and interpret it. I'm trying to rein myself in from trying to dismiss all these as barriers, because I feel like you can get past a lot of these things if you have the knowledge of how to do it. Because you got a master's degree maybe at Clemson, and now you have this knowledge after taking this class, type of a thing, right? Total shameless plug. But it does take time to find it. However, if you set up your programs already to have this element infused into it, it does not take the time any extra time to search for it because it's already there built into your program. It always is going to take time to perform some type of an assessment, right? And so I don't see this administration side of it as being too much of a barrier if it's already built into our practice. Like I think we said this at the very beginning, guys, research is already built in. We just have to think of the API process as containing, maybe it should be like apide, where can we stick the R into the apide thing and not have it sound ridiculous? Arpid. Okay.
A pride.
A pride. Ooh, good. That one doesn't sound ridiculous. A pride.
You're welcome.
Thank you, token mail. So it's already built into what we do. So this administration thing as a barrier, sure, there are going to be some outcome measurements that we want to do that are on top of what we already do in our assessment and evaluation part. And sure, that will take extra time. But again, if we create a culture around this already where it's just expected that it's part of the process, then that shouldn't be as much of a barrier. Scoring and interpreting is always going to take time, as it would for any assessment that you do. So short of like piling on 10,000 outcome measures for each patient, shouldn't be extra time. That's just my opinion, but I don't know. Okay, knowledge. So to find these things, how to interpret it, we're going to have to learn how to do it no matter what, whether it's an assessment that we're going to use or some other type of instrument that we want to use for anything. Resources, obviously, not having enough resources to purchase, or time. Time is a resource, let's be honest. Some things require equipment. It's not just, print out a paper and give it to your client to fill it out. So that's always something that could keep you from doing it. Competence. So if you just don't know how to do it, then that could be a barrier. There are many instruments in that big red book that I'd have no idea how to implement those things, and it would take me time to figure it out first. I taught an assessment class when I was a professor at Ole Miss, and I used that big red book, and I pulled out a couple in there that I thought would be great, and it took me so much time to learn how to do it just to teach it in class. I imagine it would be the same exact process in practice if you woke up one day and said, I need to measure some functional domains, and you go out and you find the factor, which is in the big red book, and it's like 10 pages long, and you have to go through each and every item and understand how to do. You probably have to practice a few times. So we have to build that confidence, and that could, for some people, be a barrier, especially when we're thinking about how often many people think that it's just one more thing on my plate on top of all my caseloads type of a thing. Okay, and then attitudes. If you just don't see the value in it, I mean, this is the flip side of the positive attitude. If you don't see the value, nobody in your organization sees the value, you're overwhelmed because you've got 10 million patients or clients or whatever, you're not sure how to do it, then it's going to be really hard to do it. Or it will feel really hard to do it. Barriers at the organizational level, time and cost. So nobody is going to pay you extra to do research or extra to do outcome measurement, which is why it should be built into what you're already doing, so that it's not extra work. If there's no policy or guidance around it, you're not sure if you're supposed to do this or not. I mean, if it does become an extra thing, if there's no requirement, then a lot of people won't do it. That's a cultural thing too. If it's just not the culture to do this in your facility, then it's not, people don't automatically do extra things all the time. And then lack of consensus. So this could be like from our professional field. If we as a profession of recreational therapy don't all agree that outcome measurement is important, then it's hard as an individual rec therapist to be like, we must measure outcomes, when nobody else is supporting that in your profession, let alone your organization, right? Right. Yes. Okay. Thanks, Claire.
Well.
Okay, so thoughts so far on outcome measurement, the importance of it, what facilitates it, what hinders it, any opinions to add or disagree?
I think this is right on. I mean, I think time and the perception of time is huge, especially in, long-term care. It's so fast-paced and we're trying to squeeze so much out. just being able to sit down and do an assessment and actually take that as a time to do the assessment complete enough that you have something useful, I think is huge. So I could definitely see that where this is a barrier, and then it's also a way to get good usable stuff too.
In long-term care, do you have, is there some policy that says within this amount of time of admittance into our facility that they have to have had an assessment? How long is that time?
So if you're following just federal standards, it's kind of ridiculous. You have 14 days after admission to have assessed them, and then 21 days to have given them a care plan. We do it much faster.
Okay, so I don't want to sound like a jerk, but 14 days seems like more than enough time to do.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But they're just talking about like squeezing it in. I mean, it's just. But if you start looking at it and trying to do, like, it's one of the number one. If you're thinking about barriers, when I start, because it's my job sometimes to go in and look at what they're doing, and they just talk about, with all the other responsibilities, meetings, and all that, having a time to do an assessment seems like a crunch for them. And to me, it's also about, well, do you know why you're doing it? If you're not prioritizing it as importantly as something else because you're not gaining value from it, then we need to look at how you're actually assessing and using that material.
Yeah, and then also when I was working at the nursing home, like, we also had the 14 days, but we did them within like 3 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
But also, you not only do you have the assessment when you admit them, but you have the quarterly assessments, the annual assessments, the assessments for significant changes. And for me personally, I had 120 residents. So I would have, 10, 15 assessments that I had to get through every day on top of doing all these activities and going to meetings and family meetings. And so it is really hard. It's like, if it were just the initial assessment, it'd be one thing, but they make you do so many assessments, so ever so often.
And the significant change is based usually on reimbursement, so they can do them quite in a rapid cycle if they seem to be needing things more, not just from us, but from nursing or those kind of other departments, more rehab.
So for something like, this is a fantastic example. So for something like an initial intake into a nursing home, and you have those 14 to 21 days to get an assessment and a care plan developed, what are all the other things that are happening that are making it so difficult to do an assessment, or the perception that it's so difficult to do an assessment?
So, one of the things I usually sit down and ask them to do is a time study so that they could actually really evaluate where their time is going. And a lot of it is direct programming. Some of it is meetings and being pulled into meetings. There's a lot of meetings upon meetings and meetings after meetings to discuss the meeting. And so even trying to talk to the administrator sometime, or the executive directors, and say, what's really important? What do you need to have them in so that they can actually be donating time for the residents? I think a lot of times it's being just pulled in different directions. Like, that the need and the professionalism to provide that individualized care, when, as Claire said, ratios are pretty they're pretty outrageous in long-term care as far as recreation services go. Mm-hmm. And there's not really any strong mandating, because we're not in the rehab department, so we don't keep the 1-6 ratios or the 1-4 ratios. So it's easy to have one rec person for 50, 60 residents and trying to provide, we've got the state and federal mandates around. Right now, there's only one person mandated by the federal government to be in recreation, and that's the director.
Well, and when I was at the nursing home, staffing is really an issue too, because the turnover is so high that when I was the recreation director, I was supposed to have 2 assistants, and I never, ever got those assistants. They were fired right before I came. Long story, but like, there was an abuse allegation, and they fired everyone who was working that shift just to make sure they got the right person. So my 2 assistants were fired, and they never replaced them, no matter how many times I would meet with my supervisor. We budgeted for 2. I have 120 residents and 2 different wings. I had the Alzheimer's wing and the regular wing. And so, like, I was doing my job as the director, but also the job of 2 assistants. So even getting the assessments done, on top of getting all the activities done and going to all the meetings, usually everything didn't get done because there just wasn't, I'm not 3 people. So, but in long-term care, that's so common because the turnover is so high because it's
And,
tough.
and it's also a place where if you're struggling, with census, which right now long-term care is, it could be seen as a place to trim your budget because we don't have any part of the reimbursement. None of what we do is part of reimbursement. So they can stretch us as thin as they want to. And as long as, the feds don't say anything, then sometimes they'll keep pushing it. So that's why, I think it's so critical that we figure out what we're doing here and doing the outcomes, because once we can start really filling out the O section and be a part of the reimbursement piece, but we have to be able to show that we have outcomes. That's how we're going to change our field in long-term care. And I mean, ultimately, that's my goal, is to make that happen.
So one of the key points that I think the McCormick article made that speaks directly to this is that if your facility, so long-term care is a really good example, if your facility at the facility level is saying these are the outcomes that we produce through our services, then rec therapy should be measuring maybe not all of those outcomes, but some or at least one of those outcomes, and seeing how RT is influencing those outcomes, because we all have our own perceptions of what our outcomes are, and they may be different than what nursing thinks or PT or whatever. But if there are facility level outcomes and we can't show that we impact any of those, that is why we're not being pulled into the reimbursement element. That is why we're not that is why we're understaffed. Like, why give resources to people who can't show that they're actually doing anything to achieve our facility goals of, these outcomes?
Absolutely.
So 100% what you just said, we have to measure. So, I mean, I hear what you're saying in terms of being understaffed and pulled in 1,000 different directions, but somehow it still has to get done. Or we will never, it's like this, circular torture chamber, right? If we can't prove, I used the P word. Okay. If we can't show, the effectiveness, or not even effectiveness, if we can't show any outcomes, then we're never going to be reimbursed or thought of as being credible or whatever, which means then we're never going to have the opportunity to have enough people or whatever to then incorporate these elements into our practice, which means that we'll never then be able to demonstrate our, the evidence of what we do, which means then we can never ask for more money or ask it, it just goes around and around. At some point, somebody has to chop that and stop and say, stop the insanity. Okay, everybody with me. Susan Powder, stop the insanity. Do you guys remember that? Or did I?
Yeah.
Nope.
I do.
Oh, you young people.
So, but I think the other thing, it speaks to competence too, because one thing that I would like to be able to show is that there is a difference when it's someone who is at a certificate level and someone who's at a degreed level.
So certificates, like who?
Well, so there's a national body that certifies activity directors. And so to me, that's, it's a great program, but it's a different level, different focus than having rec therapist in there.
Well, sure.
So I would also like to be able to show that there's a benefit to, like, if we can improve outcome and benefit our measures by having someone who is more therapeutically trained versus someone, we actually might be able to talk compensations at those points.
Yeah. Actually, the recreation director before me at the nursing home, they were hiring because she had been promoted to being dietary manager. So I just feel like if that is even, how are they related? I don't know, but yeah.
Does she have a degree in dietetics or nutrition?
No. Or rec therapy. I don't know.
She just liked to cook or something like that.
I guess she just did a little switch. Well, they said she made breakfast and stuff sometimes, so that was enough qualifier.
So this goes back to what we have talked about probably 4 times in the previous 4 weeks of this class is, entry-level competencies.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at the task domains from NCTRC, and it says in there that evaluation, and I think it says, capital R research is part of the entry level skill expectation.
Yeah.
But then we've all talked about the reality of what the skill actually is based on, you know, the various educational experiences across the country at the different universities, right?
Right.
And so if you have somebody, let's just say ideal world, right? We're talking about a rec therapist who has a master's level entry degree. And when I say master's level, I mean not a degree in something and then a master's degree in rec therapy. I'm talking about undergrad in rec therapy and master's degree in rec therapy. So they have an advanced practice element like what we've got here. Those people are uniquely qualified to be running all of this outcome measurement stuff, where you may be able to then have people like activity, I don't want to say directors, but activity assistants or whatever, who can, or other rec therapists, you know, who can be doing the day-to-day stuff, where your rec therapy director person, like you, Claire, used to be, would be the one managing this whole outcome measurement element. So, but again, when you're overstaffed, and I mean, so I realize that there are like 11 billion things that impact the actual ability to do this. But again, it's this circular torture chamber that we just have to get out of, or it's never going to change. Right.
Well, and
so
we had a PT and an OT department at that nursing home, and it was like they didn't have to do all that stuff. Like they did their treatment, like they met with their patients each day, and they had certain times, and they, you know, did their assessments, and it just seemed so much more organized, and they had so much more time.
They didn't do like the meetings after meetings after meetings type of a thing.
Well, that's because every minute they have is accounted for. They get paid for by the minute. So they have to have run like 80% efficiency. So yeah, they get left alone to do their job.
And they don't get paid to sit in meetings. They get paid to treat.
Yeah.
So the company I work for used to have rec therapy under rehab. And rehab actually gave us up about 10 years ago because it didn't fit in with the evidence-based progress that they were moving with. I know. So it's kind of like, all right, well, how do we get back to that conversation?
We have to be able to demonstrate our outcomes. Okay. Yay for a good thing we're learning to talk. We're talking about it today so we can learn how to do this. Let's keep going. So how can we measure outcomes in a way that is recognized as, okay, these are good outcomes. You did a good job measuring. I understand, in a language that is like common to all of our allied health professions. Okay. So PT, speech, OT, RT, plus nursing, plus the MD people, plus the psych people, plus everybody, that we can all speak this common language. So this is where the ICF comes around. Now, somebody in their commentary, I think, Haley, you mentioned the ICD as like you had heard of the ICD, but not the ICF or something. I think it was you, so I apologize if I got that wrong. The International Classification of Disability, the ICD, is what has been around forever and ever and ever. And the ICF is a new approach. It's a more holistic approach to understanding functioning. Okay, so we'll walk through kind of, you guys read the article, so you should have gotten some of the background. But I feel like it's pretty straightforward, but I, again, acknowledge that not everybody grasps it the first time. So we can spend as much time as we need talking about this. So the ICF breaks down into 3 different kind of areas in terms of how we understand how people function in their lives and how a health condition can impact their functioning. All of these are related to each other. So we've got body functions and structures. So think of like the A&P element of working with our clients. All of you who said, why do I have to learn anatomy and physiology? Right here is why, okay? If we don't understand our clients' functioning, physical functioning, social, emotional, cognitive, all of that, we don't understand how their health condition impacts all of that, then we can't then make the connection to recommendations for treatments and such. Okay, so understanding their functioning. Activities and participation. Side note, I hate that they use the word activities. Mm-hmm. Please even though it will say activities everywhere, think of this word as tasks. Tasks is a way better way to understand it. We'll get there in a second. But this is basically your ability to, or your capacity to complete a task, to squat, to sit down in a chair or stand up, to walk 10 feet. Okay, so tasks associated with our daily functioning. The participation element is like your participation in your daily life. So you can think of ADLs as this participation piece here. So tasks are not quite to the level of ADLs. It's a more basic element of completing things. Participation is just like participation in your life. And then we have these environmental factors. So, you know, a lot of people talk about disability not being socially defined and socially constructed. And a lot of that comes from the physical environment that people live in, the social environment that they live in. That, you know, if I have a physical impairment and inside my home I am fully independent, but the second I walk out my door, I am not independent. Is that because of my disability or because of how society has constructed the world around me that then impairs my ability to function? So that's where environmental factors come in. So there are barriers and facilitators to our daily functioning.
So since this has been out since 2002, is this the frame that's common now if we're talking about disability and health?
It is more so in the broader health profession. This is relatively new to recreational therapy. And if you guys know who Heather Porter is at Temple University, she's really spearheaded the effort to get the ICF infused into RT practice. So we're trying to use it and teach in the undergrad level for students to understand these kind of three main areas in terms of how people function. And as we walk through this, and you'll see that you can select outcomes specific to these areas. So if I'm trying to understand how somebody functions in a certain domain, I could go back to the ICF and understand and find which area they're in, and I can find a measure specifically to measure that. But if they don't learn that at the undergrad, at our entry-level degree, then ICF is never used in practice. So quick show of hands, keep your hands up. How many of you guys use the ICF in practice? Okay, Shannon, you're at the VA. You're like the anomaly because the VA is a little bit different. I mean that in a good way. Okay, so nobody, which is a little disturbing. I mean, so dang it, I don't have my books because I'm not at school. There is an ICF handbook for recreational therapy practice that Heather Porter has written. There's an old version that is one big, huge, so we call the big red book of assessments, and then there's the big blue book of ICF and activities. And so what she's doing is she has done this incredible job of connecting the domains of the ICF to outcome measurement, and then the next step to activity or intervention that you would do to achieve that outcome. So she's got like a bazillion populations in this book, what all of the potential impairments are as they relate to body functions and structures, activities and participation, and environmental factors. And then she lists all these activities that you can do to address those outcomes. So there's two editions of it. Her first edition is the original, I think it's like 2006. And then a second edition just came out, and it was such a big book that she had to split it into 3 books.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, but it's called the ICF handbook.
The one you're talking about?
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yep, that's the old one.
The old one? Okay.
Yep. So the new one is split into 3 books. And so, but it's basically that book, just she updated it and added a whole bunch of new populations to it. And then she split out the just descriptive knowledge about all these populations, and then all of this information of activity or techniques that you can use, facilitation techniques for all those populations. And then the third book is all of the ICF measurements, outcomes, codes that go with it. So it's really a 3-book set, but you can buy the books separately. If you feel like you want to start infusing the ICF into practice, I would get all 3 books together. And you can get them from, I think, Idle Arbor or something like that. So, and they're fantastic. So she's really spearheading the effort to get ICF into rec therapy. But it's not a one-person job. And right now it's really only a one-person effort. That sucks. Except for when you have things like this where we're, teaching it in class, but not everybody teaches ICF. I think Tara said in the discussion thread that she's using it in one of her undergrad classes that she's teaching. So yay for Tara. Yeah. We got to start somewhere. Anyways, you can click on this ICF browser. I'll just click on it and see. Can you guys see this or no?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, great. I would say.
Oh, wait. Yeah, no, it didn't change away from your PowerPoint.
Okay, hang on. Stop share. I don't love the ICF browser. It's a little bit clunky. That's just my opinion, but okay, can you guys see this now? Mm-hmm. So here's those 4 areas that we just discussed, and you can click into this and kind of drill down and find information about all of this gets so detailed in the level of functioning and the different structures. And it's not just the structures, so we can look at activities and participation. And this might not make much sense until we maybe do a few more slides. Okay, so skip this. We'll come back to this in just a quick second. But let me show you, go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so let's finish this real fast. And we'll go back to the browser. Okay, so broad level understanding of the ICF. Again, this is a holistic perspective on health. So they don't call it a disease or a disorder, although it's here in parentheses. They call it a health condition. So they're trying to also change the language that we use when we talk about people. So this is not coming from a deficit approach, which is what the standard medical model approach to health and functioning is. This is trying to take more of a strengths-based approach to things. So it's whatever your health condition is. This is why if you have ever looked up our undergrad curriculum, we have a physical health conditions class and a mental health conditions class. We don't have a physical disabilities class or mental cognitive disabilities. I don't know. Okay, so we are trying to take that strengths-based focus. And then we have our 3 areas, and then our environmental and personal factors as this extra element. You can see there are arrows everywhere. So what this means is that an impairment in one of these areas impacts functioning in all other areas. That's the basic gist of this. Is this clear?
Yeah.
I think it's pretty straightforward. So an amputation, let's say somebody has an amputation. That would be up here in health condition. The body function, the impact on the body and function and structure would be loss of a limb, maybe some residual pain in the residual limb. What are some other structures and functions that would be impacted by an amputation? Decompensation in other parts of the body. So loss of muscle tone in maybe the residual limb. But maybe there would be an increase in muscle tone in the other limb. Like if you're talking about a leg amputation, the remaining leg, the good leg, might get stronger because it's the only leg. Okay, so all of that would be taken into consideration here. But how would all of that impact somebody's task, execution of tasks? Okay, so somebody with a leg amputation, let's just say above the knee, single leg amputation, may have difficulties walking upstairs, may have difficulties getting up from a chair. may have difficulties doing what else?
Taking a shower.
Say that again.
Taking a shower.
Taking a shower.
Driving a car.
Driving a car. Okay, so now we're getting into this participation domain. Okay, so this is, think of participation as like your involvement in your life. So driving a car is not necessarily like it is a task, but it's not a task as defined by what the ICF says tasks are, but that would be more in the participation area. So somebody who's fresh off of, an amputation may also not be participating in their leisure because they're not quite sure how to do that with now only one leg. So that would be an impairment in this domain. Okay, so again, it's the holistic approach to understanding health conditions. Whereas in the medical model approach, all we're focusing on is what's going on in your body now that you're missing half a leg. And there are other professions that will focus only on this. So I'm going to totally call out PT and use them as an example. What is the point in physical therapy practice if you are working with somebody with a leg amputation? Rehabilitate. Right? Get back to the point of just being able to function now with one leg. And by function, I mean that you can walk, right? There's not usually the extension then to this participation. So they are really focusing on here and here in their treatment. In PT, for example, in this example, they're not extending it to this life participation element.
So is activities more like your ADLs then? Is that where activity is?
I would say activities are more here in the participation domain. Let's hop over one more slide. Here's all the different chapters. Like it's an actual book, and then when we look on that ICF browser, it breaks it down into chapters so you can see what all the functions are, what all the structures are. So this is like anatomy rearing its ugly head. Mm-hmm. And even here too, anatomy and physiology here. Activities and participation. So some of this self-care is like ADL type stuff.
Right.
But then we get into this other area that's not really ADLs, domestic life, community.
But those two are combined, right? Because they talked about the two of them being, I didn't quite understand that part about them being overlapping and that there was a grouping of it that was different from originally.
Yeah. They're in their own, they're together in like the ICF browser and in the book, but in like the visual model of it, they're separate, but it's easier to think of them as being separate. And I'll show you an example really quick of how it's maybe easier to separate them. Here are some of the environmental factors that influence people's functioning. We're going to take a break in a hot second before we go back to the browser. Okay, so the nice thing about the ICF is that it gives us a structured way to think about which outcomes to measure and how to do this. So for example, if we can use the mini mental status exam to measure cognitive functioning, and that is a body function and structure element, right? We can use the FIM to measure, sorry, my little camera people are covering that, my text. You can use the FIM to measure functional tasks and capabilities. And that's an activity element. So you, Holly, you have the big red book right there. Do you want to flip open to the FIM really quick and tell us the domains that it measures?
It'll be just a second.
Sure. It looks like Kate has it too, so you guys can race to find the FIM.
So while we're waiting, say like a veteran has a below the knee amputation, would like playing soccer with his child be activity?
Say that again. I missed. Would playing soccer with his kid be a what?
Would it be an activity or participation? Would that fall under which one?
Okay, both. It would be
domestic life? Would that be?
Well,
that?
so think of it as like a tiered thing. At the highest level, playing soccer is a participation element.
Right.
But what are the functional skills that it takes to play soccer? Who's got to have some balance? Who's got to have some ability to be mobile? Right? Those are activities.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is why activity and participation are kind of combined, because in order to participate in I hate the word activity. Let's just call it task and participation. In order to participate in activities in your life, you have to be able to execute some tasks like walking, standing, swallowing, breathing, whatever. And so that's why they're together, when really they're kind of two separate things, but within the constructs here, they're together because they're related. It's like a tiered thing.
What was the question again? Sorry, that you wanted me to look up. I have the FIM scale, but what specifically were you wanting me?
What are the domains that they measure with the FIM? I know it's, functional tasks, but what are those tasks?
Let's see here. Quickly.
It might have like an explanation in like that page before it gets into the actual instrument, where it like summarizes all of the things about the instrument.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at, because it's got like the 7-point scale on here.
Mm-hmm.
I might be on the wrong page. So like the degree of assistance an individual requires? Is that what you're
That's
wanting?
one
It's
domain.
like it's the independence scale. So to see how much assistance, if they're dependent or independent, and like in there. But
so what are the tasks that it's measuring? Functional independence. So walking.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look. It's not on that page. I'm gonna have to find where else it was at in here.
Sorry guys, I wish I had a copy of the FIM right now that we could look at this.
Well, I'm actually finding that it doesn't have, it's basically saying that you have to order it. It's not giving you.
Yeah, it's not really.
It's not giving you actually like an example of it that shows it. It's just, there's like 5 different places where it's just described.
Okay.
It breaks down. Yeah, it just breaks down the 7 levels of.
Okay, so then look up the factor R, or the
Functional assessment of characteristics.
Or the CERT key. Either one of those. I know those are in the big red book, and they will do what I'm trying to do here. And then we'll take a break.
I think I just Googled measured domains by the FIM, and it's listed eating, grooming, bathing, dressing. Is that the kind of thing you're looking for?
Yes. So
okay.
Task.
So the domains for the factor are physical, cognitive, and social emotional.
Okay, so
it measures 11 areas in each of the 3 domains.
Okay, so some of those would fall under body function and structure. Say those again: physical, social.
Physical, cognitive, social, and / emotional.
The social emotional might fall under activity, but the physical would fall under potentially the body function and structure element. Okay, so all of a sudden, right, we have a little bit of structure to how we are selecting instruments to measure things, right?
Right.
Let's look really quick. So the community integration questionnaire, which is in the big red book, this also would measure, it's also in the big red book. This would measure the participation aspect. So think of participation as involvement in your life. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to have to skip over to PowerPoint number 2 in order for us to continue this discussion. So how about we take a break for 5 minutes? And when we come back, we will dive into more ICF awesomeness. And, okay, ready, go, 7:25, come back. I'm gonna go get some water. All right, everybody, if you're there, come on back. By the way, Twix now comes in dark chocolate variety. That's good. Yummy, yummy. My mid-class break.
I'm so excited.
Yeah,
That sounds fantastic.
I love dark chocolate, so I'm a fan. Thank you, QT gas station, for Okay. Something just got in my eye. Sorry, guys, something just got in my eye. Hang on. I'm good. Okay, back to the ICF. Yeah, for a second, Jake, I thought you were laying down on a carpet.
No, just my tapestry.
Okay, so back to sharing some screens here. I'm going to skip a whole bunch of slides. Okay, so this element, this kind of little piece here, section of our little ICF model is what the medical model focused on. So just body function and structure and that task element. And then this is what our current changes in the medical and health care field are resulting in is a holistic look. So trying to understand the differences kind of between these three categories, let's look, oh man, all these, okay, at a little bit more of the definition of these domains. So here's the body function and structure. So the definition is a physiological function of body system or anatomical parts such as organs, limbs, and brain. Here are all the different elements that you could measure, that or constructs we can measure or outcomes we could measure relating to this domain in the ICF. Motor control and planning, vision, audition, mood, language, executive control. So a lot of this is brain elements. Down here, more physical elements. Visual, spatial function. Okay, so that's probably like brain and everything. But strength, gait, posture, flexibility. So the FIM doesn't really measure this type of stuff. But the Berg balance scale, where did that go? I mean, balance isn't on here, but it would be one of the elements in body functions and structure. How would we measure strength? Like what kind of an instrument could we use to measure strength? What are those grippy thingies where you grip it really as hard as you can grip it and it makes that little needle move? An ergum, no. What's that thing called? Anybody know what I'm talking about? No? I had to do that in a...
I don't know what it's called.
But you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, we had to do it in our anatomy and phys lab.
Yeah, so you squeeze it looks like, you know what, bodybuilders squeeze those things to like make their forearms big and huge. It's something like that, but then it has a dial on it with a little needle and tells you, you know, that's a measure of strength, right?
Claire, aren't the kids at Sullivan using that for their assessment?
Maybe.
Yes, they are. That's what
Yes.
I'm saying.
We used
Yeah.
those when I did the fitness assessments at Sullivan with Audrey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I cannot remember the name of it. It'll come back to me like when I'm sleeping tonight or something. Okay, so that's a measure of strength, specifically grip strength. You know, flexibility, range of motion. What do we use to measure those elements? This might be outside of the scope of what some of you do in your practice because you don't work in like a rehabby type of center, and that's okay. But some of you do, and so these may be appropriate. You may be more familiar with it. We do have to be careful that we might cross over into, not cross over in a bad way, but this is where we might overlap with PT and what they do, and they might be measuring these same exact things. So if we don't know how to administer the measure of strength with that grip thingy or a range of motion or gait or posture or whatever, we may be able to work interdisciplinary with somebody from PT who knows how to measure those things, or maybe they've already done it and they can share data with us. And that helps us understand somebody's physical functioning. Because why go to PT and have all these measures done and then so that they know what's going on in your physical functioning, and then come to our tea and we do maybe something different that gives us the same knowledge. We should share. Okay, but that doesn't always happen. Anyway, so here is our body functions and structures, and this is not an exhaustive list. None of these are exhaustive lists of what can be measured in these areas, but it's giving you an idea. Okay, the activity, scratch that out, just call it task. Okay, the capacity to perform a task or action by an individual. So what are those tasks or actions? Standing, climbing stairs, walking, mobility, lifting and carrying, sitting, dressing, eating, grooming, hygiene. So we're getting into some ADLs here. Money management, that's probably a little bit beyond ADLs. Tasks associated with leisure interests. So not the leisure activity itself, but the tasks that it requires in order to do it. So maybe there's an element here of planning community outings. Do you have, the memory to remember a bus route schedule? So you don't have a car, right? And you want to go do something in your community. Can you remember what bus route line you're supposed to be on? Okay, so the task associated with doing those interests.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I thought I understood activity versus participation just because we've talked about it so many times in class, but on here it says cooking a meal. I thought that would be more like life participation, but then the actual action of stirring or pouring the milk, or that would be the task. So could you explain
Sure.
that?
The way that I understand these, I agree with what you're saying. And I think if you look at this bullet point, it's cooking or meal preparation. So the tasks associated with cooking a meal, so chopping, measuring,
Okay.
stirring.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I agree with you. I think those are the tasks
Mm-hmm.
to perform the higher level thing of cooking.
Yeah.
And eating. So this is where, again, I think in that whole explanation in the document you read about ICF, where it kind of puts activity and participation together, that they're very obviously closely related, right? That you can't do the participation in the activity without accomplishing the tasks of it.
Yeah.
Did that make it more clear, or just make it worse?
No, that that made it more clear. Thank you.
Good. Okay, so here's our participation domain right in the middle. Individuals' actual doing or involvement in life situations. So this is eating the meal that you just did all these tasks to make. Okay, home management. So maybe that's a cooking element, or cleaning your home, or paying your bills, or any number of things related to your home, mowing the lawn. Going to school, work, recreation and leisure is in there, religious or spiritual activities. All of this is just participation in your life. Okay, these are the tasks that it takes to accomplish all of those activities, larger activities or elements of participation that we do. Okay, so here's our environmental factors. So the physical, social, and attitudinal environment in which people live and conduct their lives. So all the elements that we can measure. We'll get some more details on how to understand how to measure these pieces, because that seems weird. How do you measure workplace accommodations? Is there some type of survey that you could do here? Probably not, but it may be more of an observational type of thing, and talking through something with somebody. Are you able to talk to your boss about needing time off, or able to have a flexible work schedule, or being able to work from home as opposed to coming into an office every day? If somebody can't do that, then they have an environmental barrier. So there's probably we'll look at ways to look into measuring that. And then our last domain here is quality of life. I mean, ultimately, this is our ultimate outcome, right? Obviously, we want to impact all of these smaller outcomes, but the big holy grail outcome is quality of life, and of course, all of the pretty standard domains that go along with that. Any questions so far on all of the elements that you can measure? Obviously, again, not exhaustive, but the elements you can measure with the ICF. Good? Okay. Some more examples. I mean, this is basically the same thing, just a little different. Okay, so let's go to stop share. There's a handy dandy website called rehabmeasures.org. So let's say we've identified some constructs that we want to measure as organized by the ICF. So now how do we choose, or how do we, what instruments do we use to actually measure those constructs? Okay, so let's work with our long-term care nursing home piece of the pie here, or example. Let's go back to this. Let's identify an area of functioning that would be impacted by somebody maybe with dementia. An older adult.
I mean, memory.
Okay, memory. Where is our memory? So memory, there it is.
Executive control, yeah.
Right in the middle. Okay, so that's our body function and structure. What would be some of the activities that would be impaired by that health condition?
Medication management.
Okay.
I mean, it certainly would depend on the level.
Yeah.
Sure. Let's try to be a generalized. I know that's hard to do, but let's just say somebody who's in the early stages of dementia.
Money management is one of the first signs, too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, this is not an all-exhaustive list, so if there's something that you think is missing off of here but would be a likely area of impairment in tasks.
I mean, meal prep, I mean, often they're leaving things on. I mean, those are usually the early signs is money and meal prep.
Okay.
That's what gets the families involved. They've almost burned down the house or their bills are backing up.
Okay. Okay, good. So we've got memory as an early indicator, money management and cooking, meal prep type of issues going on.
Did I see driving on there? It's really small on my screen, like under cleaning. Is that like laundry, cleaning? It's towards the bottom.
Yep, driving.
Okay,
Check.
yeah. And often, I don't know if like being able to locate familiar places is considered under driving, because oftentimes they have difficulty, like they forget where they're going and stuff like that.
Okay.
I don't know if that's associated. There you go. That's bigger. I couldn't really read it before.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, no, you're good.
Okay, so we've got some areas for measurement identified in body structure and functions. We've got, so that would be more of a body function, not so much structure, right? A memory.
Right.
We've got driving, cooking, and money management and medications management in the activity area. What about in participation in life? What areas with early stages of dementia would be impaired?
Home management.
Yeah.
Say that again?
Home management.
Work.
Work, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, my cat just barged in.
I mean, kind of parenting, but not really. It's like parent relations with their children, because early stages, I mean, not recognize your children is kind of middle to later, but sometimes you get that dissociation with not recognizing. So I don't know if
Sure.
that'd be considered under parenting.
Maybe. Okay, so let's kind of ignore this environmental stuff first. Let's focus on these three main areas of the ICF. So what could we use to measure their memory? I mean, you guys work in this field, so you might already know of some measures.
I mean, you could use either the global deterioration scale or the mini mental.
Mm-hmm.
So you could go to rehabmeasures.org and type in memory. And it's going to spend a lot of time thinking about it, apparently. Okay. And it has brought up 38 potential instruments, standardized, validated, blah, blah, blah. These are solid, that could be used to measure memory to some degree. So the nice thing about what Rehab Measures does is it gives you all the information about who it's appropriate to use with or not. Okay, so the stroke adapted sickness impact profile, probably not appropriate for our early stage dementia patient. Skip. The mini mental state. Okay, so you already know. So, I mean, it's telling us right here who it's used for. This seems like a pretty solid thing. Let's say we don't know anything about it. We've never done this before. Maybe let's see if we can get into the instrument review. So click on that, and now we can get all this information about it, right? So it consists of 11 simple questions or tasks grouped into 7, sorry, all these little cameras are covering my text. Grouped into 7 domains, and here's the 7 domains. Here's how to, not necessarily how to score it, but how to understand what the scores mean. So a possible score of 30 is used to provide a picture of an individual's present cognitive performance based on direct observation of the completion of the items. So a score of less than 24 is the generally accepted cutoff, indicating presence of a cognitive impairment. So levels of impairment has been classified as none, mild, and severe. So here's the ranges here. So the lower the score, obviously, the more severe. So it even tells you here what domain you're measuring in. Body function. Yay, we got that one right. Good job, guys. But we knew that because we're pros. How long does it take to administer? How many items? What equipment do you need? What training? So this is a really important element because some instruments can only be administered by a PT, some only by an OT. I don't know that there are any that are only by an RT, but maybe one day we'll get there in our field. Sometimes they are free, other times not so much. So here's some information on that. The nice thing about Rehab Measures is that it's free. If it's free, they will usually put a link to however you get it. So you could come here, find one, and actually get it. So when we talk about what those facilitators and barriers are to doing outcome measurement, and part of that is searching for, finding, and getting access to instruments, Rehab Measures all of a sudden becomes like this fantastic resource, right? Even if you can't actually get the instrument, all of a sudden you have all the knowledge about these instruments. And if they don't provide the instrument on here, they generally tell you how to get it. So if you have to buy it from a publisher or contact an author or whatever. Lots of information here on what like the minimal detectable change, minimally clinically important difference. I can never say those combination of words together. This tells you how many points change you need in order to say that this intervention impacted this in a positive way. So a 5-point change or less over a 5 to 10 year period. This means that, I'm trying to remember how to interpret this. A minimal detectable change. I always get the MDC and the MCID mixed up. I'll come back to this because I'm going to have to look into my notes. They're even citing prior research that has used this. So this gives you a little bit more detail into the cutoff scores. So up here, the original listing is just none, mild, severe. So this particular study broke it down into more details. So that's interesting. Okay, so now we have a potential measure to address our memory issue with our client. Let's see what else we've got here. The FIM. So this, okay, so this little explanation right here doesn't really give us enough detail as to whether or not it would measure memory. It's been used with potentially our population, geriatrics, you know, such a broad explanation here. So we would have to go into the instrument review and see what those tasks are. 13 motor tasks. So as we're looking through here, there is a element of memory that it could measure. Now you're going to get a whole bunch of other information that you may or may not want, although this actually might be really good, because what are those activity elements that we identified as having potential impairments? Eating, well, cooking is really what we identified. Social interaction, sort of. You were talking, Holly, about the parental relationship. So there might be an element here that we could measure. Okay, so really important to read this information to make sure that this instrument is actually appropriate for your population. Scoring criteria. So they're calling the FIM a measure of the activity domain and not the body function domain, even though we identified memory as a body function. So there is weird overlap, but it's okay. All right, so let's go back, see what other instruments we've got here. The Nottingham Health Profile assesses perceived health. Well, that's really broad. I'm not even going to click on it because it doesn't seem to include our population. So if you find an instrument that seems really, really interesting, it's never been used with your population, you may not want to use it. I mean, if you feel like this is the instrument that's going to give me the information that I need, you should have some really strong justification for why you're using it with a population that's never been tested with, because you would theoretically be the first. You would not have much support in how to interpret things with that population. This looks like it's really for a stroke population, so we wouldn't want to use that. So much that we can go through in here and choose from. And
Bless you.
so for all of you who thought finding something would take forever, in just a few minutes we found 3 or 4 potential options, right? Okay, let's go back to our search results. Actually, I can go right here. Search, stop. What was one of our tasks? Cooking.
So if there's not a measure in here for something, then it probably doesn't exist. I mean, is this a pretty exhaustive database?
Good question. It's not exhaustive, and it doesn't have any recreation, as far as I'm aware, recreation and leisure stuff. They are adding to it all the time, but let's see what we can find in recreation. Because this is really focused more on, I don't want to say focused, it was developed more by PTs. Everything in here is very rehab-y. I mean, it's called rehab measures. And so it's a lot more rehab-y focused, physical rehab focused than what we kind of tend to look at in rec therapy, in terms of kind of some of the more soft, I don't know how to explain that.
More directed by like the medical model. They're more concerned.
Exactly. But they're always adding to it. And because, you know, rec therapists did contribute to some degree to this, it's not totally absent, but you won't find a ton. So example, are searching for recreation. Stroke adapted sickness impact profile. Let's see how recreation is in here. 30 items. Each item is a statement describing a change in behavior that reflects the impact of an illness on some aspect of daily life. Patients asked yes or no. They're weighted. 8 subscales. Social interaction, maybe it's recreation is built into that one. Let's see if we can get it. This free? So you'd have to download this article, so you could take this article right here, this citation, and go to Google Scholar, our handy dandy go-to search engine for all things scholarly publications, and see what we can find. See if I can actually get it. So this is explaining the development of the whole entire thing. And they tested it and got some data with it and some results. Let's see if they provide a little screenshot of what it looks like. Okay, so it's not formatted the way that you would probably give it to a patient, but it's asking them, if we go back here, to identify yes or no on the items that are most descriptive of themselves on a given day. I make difficult moves with help, for example, getting into or out of cars and bathtubs, yes or no. So we could go through here and see if there's something recreation and leisure based. I am doing fewer social activities with groups of people. So that could be loosely related to rec and leisure. So if we're trying to address an impairment in recreation and leisure functioning, even though this came up in our search for recreation measurements, I wouldn't really say that this is going to help us address what we want to address. It's not going to give us any knowledge about how their recreation or leisure is impaired, right? And if we design an intervention to help improve their recreation and leisure, and we use this as our measure, we're not going to be able to see any outcomes related to improving their recreation and leisure, because this isn't measuring recreation and leisure, is it? No. The answer is no.
No, it is not.
Good job. Okay, so again, very, very useful, but we have to go through, we have to be critical about it and make sure that we, get out of my way, really look at all of the elements of it. So when we just did this search, it said here, matching text. Oh, not assess pain, recreation, not assess, does not assess, assess. I cannot talk today. I don't know what this means down here. Matching text, that's weird. Anyways, this would not be a great recreation measure. The French Activities Index. Patients recovering from stroke. So if we're talking specifically about our dementia population, we wouldn't want this. Unless there was something in here that made it seem like there was mild cognitive impairment. That could be like our early stage dementia population, right? Sort of ish.
Yeah, but there are too many other factors than just the mild impairment.
Mm-hmm. Assessment of life habits. Social participation across 12 domains. So that might be a possibility. Okay, so I think going back to the original issue here is, no, this is not a fully exhaustive database, but it is a very well-stocked database. And so it's just a matter of putting in the time to kind of search for measures in there. So what did we identify? Oh, cooking as one of our impairments in the activity domain. Man, my internets are slow today. Sorry, guys. I need some like Jeopardy music playing. The Berg balance scale. Interesting, right? Obviously, the Berg balance scale is not going to measure cooking, and that is a participation, potentially a participation domain element. But this is going exactly to what kind of Abby was talking about. Like there are some other tasks that we would think would be more task related and not participation related when it comes to cooking. So standing, stirring, cutting. So obviously this isn't going to measure stirring and cutting, but it will measure balance, which is a necessary element to cooking, right? But
Yes.
I mean, you really have to decide if this is really what you're trying to get at, or if you really want something more about the actual cooking, stirring, cutting, chopping type of a thing. Gait. Also important in the process of cooking in terms of being able to walk from like a fridge to a table or something, but maybe not what we're trying to get at. The Canadian Occupational Performance Measure. Can I just random comment? What does it really mean, occupation, in terms of occupational therapy? I don't know. Anybody care to define that for me? I actually looked up a definition of occupational therapy and they use the word occupation twice in the definition, which just doesn't make sense. Okay, random. All right, so this occupational performance measure. The domains. I don't see any domains listed. Man, they've got it in 24 languages though. I would say this would not measure what we want. And you have to buy it. So that's probably part of the reason why they don't give you a ton of information. Okay, delete. We're not going to use this instrument because we don't have access to it. Okay, so, I mean, we could spend forever kind of going through all this stuff. Hey, look, the PHQ. Excuse me. Which measures lots of things. Depression, really. But interesting that this would come up in searching for cooking. The Glasgow Coma Scale. So you cannot be in a coma and cook. So I don't know why I brought this type of stuff up. So again, we have to be critical with it. What did we say was in our participation domain that we had a impairment in?
Work.
Good call. Maybe this is where the occupational therapy will come in. I'm being a jerk. All those OTs out there. Work. Maybe we should call it employment. Community integration. So might get a little bit at work elements. We'd have to dig into that information. So maybe, I mean, obviously that would, like a visual neglect issue would play into your ability to work, but it's not exactly measuring work directly. So we have to be really clear on what we're trying to measure in each of these elements, right? To just say work broadly doesn't get us the information we need. Okay, so thoughts so far about the ICF and rehab measures and being able to use it to identify what outcomes we want to measure and then finding instruments to measure those outcomes. Thoughts, opinions, concerns, questions?
So I know you haven't gone fully in depth to the ICF website for the database or whatever, but
the browser.
Yeah. So is the browser meant to show all of the structures, functions, and then from there you would go to rehab measures and type in what you found from there? I think I'm just confused about what the browser is. Is it just a big long list of functions and participation, all that stuff? Or does it have other things, I guess?
Let's go to the browser real quick. I don't love the browser. I think it's clunky. And every time I teach this in class, I have to go back and play with it for a while, but it's just not easy to use in my opinion. I don't know. So it's not like you can put in here spina bifida. It doesn't bring up any results, right?
Right.
So, but let's just kind of look. So some of this is having to do with codes, the codes that you would enter in if your billing and documentation was connected to the ICF. So if we're talking about spina bifida, we have a client with spina bifida. We're going to look at in all these different areas, right? Let's get rid of this and we'll start at the top, body functions. What is going to be impacted by spina bifida? Probably some elements with digestive. So knowledge, in case you don't know this about people with spina bifida, almost all of them have some type of gastrointestinal dysfunction. So we would look here in digestive. So now we're getting codes, right? So if we have to enter codes, it would have something to do with this. So we would likely have some digestive function issues here. Let's click on that. Open. Food tolerance, I can tell you that's going to be an issue. Functions of accepting suitable food and drink for digestion and rejection. What is unsuitable? Interesting. Okay. I'm not really sure what we would search for in there. Now I've got the codes associated with that element of, the impairment associated with, because it's not just enough to say spina bifida, right? We have to really think about all the different areas of somebody's life, body, everything that would be impacted by that. That's what this whole ICF is about, this holistic approach to it, right? And so as we're documenting what we're working on with people, I'm not really sure what digestion. I don't know. I figure it out every year and then I forget and then I have to do this again and it's not so great. So people who have bowel and bladder programs, like individuals with spinal cord injuries, whether it's spina bifida or a spinal cord injury from a car accident or whatever, usually always have some bowel and bladder program. So do they use catheters or not or whatever? And so being able to understand all of that and tie it in with the ICF with coding, that's how this is. Honestly, I don't ever use this and I don't know anybody who uses the ICF browser. In the 4 years I've taught this class, I've asked this question every time of all the practitioners and none of them use it. So I don't know that I can answer that question for you. And I've talked to Marika about this too. And she doesn't know anybody who uses it either. So I'm not exactly sure what the browser is for, other than if you don't have the ICF book, because this comes in an actual book and you get all these same codes. I'm assuming that this replaces the book.
Okay. So basically this is just for more specific parts of the ICF and then it gives you the codes.
Mm-hmm. Also, so what's impacted in body structures by spina bifida?
You like intestine, stomach?
Well, it's a spinal cord injury technically. So
I thought we were still talking about the whole digestive thing.
nope, think broadly, just spina bifida. So
Spinal cord?
cord and related structures.
Nervous system.
Open. So many codes. So this would depend, these different codes here depend on where the lesion is on somebody's spine from spina bifida. So for example, my husband has spina bifida. He's an L4-5, so super duper low. So again, once you get to this point, I've identified what his codes would be. I'm not sure what to put in the search engine here. Yeah. Okay, so, but there's also likely some digestive, metabolic, and endocrine system issues. Like I said, there's always the tummy, genitourinary and reproductive systems. This would apply to anybody with a spinal cord injury, regardless of what the issue was that caused it. Maybe some skin and related structures because there's pressure sores for people who use wheelchairs, regardless, again, of the reason why. Okay, so activities and participation. So here we can start to think about how does spina bifida impact tasks and participation? Anything in the learning and applying knowledge. So depending on where that lesion is on their back, some people with spina bifida have cognitive impairments associated with it, and some don't. So just that's a person by person issue. Definitely going to be some mobility issues. So we'd have to drill down to find the codes for all of those. My understanding with the ICF browser is it's really about finding your codes. This is for like documentation and billing.
Okay.
But in the process of doing this, every time I've done this, is it really makes you think about the health condition and all of the, it's not just, you can't just say somebody has spina bifida. And that means that their, spinal cord was in a little sac outside their back when they were born. Okay, but how does that like trickle out into every aspect of their life? And I think this forces you to think about all the different areas where there could be an impact because of that health condition. So yeah. Okay, thoughts. Did we blow anybody's minds in a bad way or a good way with the ICF? Am I kicking a dead horse? Do you guys totally get it? Or do we need to talk about this again next week?
I think maybe more examples would be helpful. Like, I think I get it, but I'd like to see more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't need to spend 2.5 hours doing it, but maybe next week what I'll have you guys do is pair up and take a health condition, and I have a little worksheet that we can do where we can fill out what the elements are, the outcomes that you would measure in each of those, and looking for instruments and brainstorming rec therapy based interventions that you could use to address those outcomes. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do that in class next week. So
Or could we even see like an excerpt from the big blue book that you were talking about?
Yes, so if you have the big blue book, awesome. If not, I will photocopy some strategic sections of the 3 books.
Okay, thank you.
Or if you're an on-campus student, you're welcome to swing by my office and look yourself, but I'll make copies for the online students if you guys don't have any of those books as well. What do you guys think? Like, I'm seeing like blank stares and like half of you look like you're asleep. I realize it's late and this is like a weekly occurrence, right? But What do we think about the ICF and just outcome measurement in general? If you had to start doing this tomorrow, those of you who are practicing, what do you think?
I think I'm in the same place that I need to see a little bit more how the application of it.
Okay.
I think the blue book would be very helpful to see how Heather did the trail of, domains to outcomes to interventions.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else? Any other thoughts about it? We are a quiet group tonight. This is why I hate teaching all online. I like the in-person interaction. I can read body language way better than I can of these little tiny faces on our screen. Okay. Super quiet tonight. All right, so then next week we will do a little bit more in this, and hopefully you'll walk out of it thinking like, ICF, yeah. I will say that the ICF can provide a nice little framework for any type of thesis or dissertation or project, research project. And we can talk about more next week about how that could be incorporated into like capital R research as opposed to research and practice. So I'll do a little bit of prep for that next week as well. If there are no other burning questions or comments, it doesn't look like anybody's like beating down their screen to ask me a question. So we'll just call it a night, and evidence tables next week by midnight.
Can I ask a quick question about the evidence table? I meant to, sorry, I wrote it down like right after we had talked about it and we already moved into the reading. So I wanted to make sure I asked because I wasn't sure if you covered this last week. If we have come across meta-analyses, are we allowed to use at least one of those in our evidence table, or don't you want that included at all? Okay.
You can use those. Mm-hmm. Those are like gold mines. I would not pass those up.
You're great. Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Same thing with a meta-analysis or meta-synthesis, which would be the qualitative version of a meta-analysis. Anything you can find like that don't pass that up.
Okay.
Okay. If that's it, have a great night. Thank you for joining all online. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.